Have you ever felt overwhelmed by your emotions, unable to control anger, fear, or anxiety? Have you ever regretted saying something in the heat of the moment? If so, you're not alone. Emotions are powerful forces, shaping our experiences and interactions. But what if you could master them instead of being controlled by them? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's explore this journey together. Let me tell you the story of Elliot, a wise old monk who once struggled deeply with his emotions. His journey is a testament to the power of mindfulness and inner peace. Elliot lived in a quiet monastery nestled in the rolling hills of Vermont. The monastery, surrounded by towering maple trees, was a place of solitude and wisdom. People from all walks of life visited, seeking guidance from the monks who had dedicated their lives to spiritual practice. Among them, Elliot was one of the most respected elders. But few knew that, in his younger years, he had been a man tormented by uncontrollable emotions. As a young man, Elliot was often consumed by anger and anxiety. He would lash out at others, feel overwhelmed by stress, and struggle to find peace. The unpredictability of life frightened him. He worried about things beyond his control and allowed frustration to dictate his actions. His emotions ruled him, and he felt powerless against them. But deep down, he longed for something more, a way to break free from the chains of his own mind. One day, Elliot met a revered monk named Thomas. Thomas was unlike anyone Elliot had ever met. He carried an air of serenity, as if nothing could disturb his inner stillness. His eyes held the depth of an ancient lake, calm, unwavering, and full of wisdom. Elliot knew instantly that this man held the answers he was searching for. Elliot approached Thomas with a heart full of questions. "Master, how do you remain so calm when the world is filled with chaos? How do you control your emotions when they feel so overpowering?" Thomas smiled gently and gestured for Elliot to sit beside him under the shade of an old oak tree. "Emotions," he said, "are like passing clouds in the sky. They come and go, but they do not define the sky itself. The key is not to fight them, but to observe them, understand them, and let them flow." These words planted a seed in Elliot's heart. He realized that he had spent his whole life trying to suppress his emotions or react impulsively to them. He had never stopped to observe them without judgment. This marked the beginning of his journey toward emotional mastery. Over the years, Elliot devoted himself to studying and practicing mindfulness. He learned that emotions were not enemies to be defeated, but teachers to be understood. Through meditation and self-reflection, he slowly unraveled the patterns of his mind. His once uncontrollable anger softened into patience. His anxiety transformed into trust, and his fears no longer dictated his actions. Now, as an elder monk, Elliot dedicated his life to guiding others on their own journeys. He shared his wisdom with those who came seeking peace, teaching them the art of mastering emotions rather than being enslaved by them. And so, this story begins. Through Elliot's experiences, you will discover practical lessons on how to gain control over your emotions, not by suppressing them, but by understanding and channeling them into something greater. Are you ready to embark on this journey? Stay with me as we explore Elliot's path to wisdom. And don't forget to share your own experiences in the comments below. If this story resonates with you, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to continue learning with us. Part 1. The journey to wisdom. Elliot's journey toward emotional mastery was not an easy one. After his first conversation with Thomas, he knew that the road ahead required patience, discipline, and deep self-reflection. The path of wisdom was not about gaining control over emotions by force, but by understanding their nature. Thomas had given Elliot a simple yet profound exercise. Each morning, before you speak to anyone, sit in silence and observe your thoughts. Do not judge them. Do not push them away. Simply watch. At first, Elliot found this incredibly difficult. His mind raced with worries, regrets, and frustrations. The stillness made him more aware of how chaotic his inner world truly was. But he persisted. Day after day, he sat beneath the same oak tree, watching his thoughts like a silent observer. One morning, as he sat in deep contemplation, he noticed something remarkable. The thoughts that once consumed him no longer had the same power over him. He could see them arise, linger, and fade away, like waves on the surface of a lake. He realized for the first time that he was not his thoughts. He was the awareness behind them. Encouraged by this insight, Elliot sought out Thomas again. "Master, I have begun to see my thoughts as passing waves, but my emotions still grip me tightly. How do I free myself from their hold?" Thomas smiled and handed Elliot a small cup of water. "Take this and shake it vigorously," he instructed. Elliot did as he was told, and the water became cloudy and turbulent. "Now set it down and wait," Thomas said. Elliot placed the cup on the ground. Slowly the swirling water began to settle, and the murkiness cleared. "This is your mind," Thomas explained. "When you react to your emotions, you shake the cup. The more you engage with anger, fear, or frustration, the more turbulent your inner world becomes. But if you allow stillness, the emotions will settle on their own." This was a turning point for Elliot. He realized that he had spent his whole life shaking the cup, fueling his emotions instead of allowing them to settle naturally. He began practicing the art of stillness, not by suppressing his emotions, but by giving them space to exist without interference. As months passed, Elliot encountered many challenges. There were days when anger flared up, when old fears crept back in, but now, instead of reacting, he watched them with patience. He saw them for what they truly were, temporary visitors, not permanent residents. One particularly difficult evening, Elliot found himself in deep turmoil. He had received news that his younger brother, whom he had not seen in years, had spoken harshly of him. Old wounds resurfaced, and he felt a familiar surge of resentment. But instead of reacting, he sat, in meditation, acknowledging the pain without judgment. He visualized his brother with compassion, understanding that hurtful words often stem from one's own suffering. The next morning, Elliot shared his experience with Thomas. "I felt the sting of anger rise, but I did not let it consume me. Instead, I observed it, and eventually it faded." Thomas nodded. "You are learning, Elliot. Emotions are not enemies. They are teachers." Through meditation, mindful breathing, and self-reflection, Elliot continued his journey. He understood that emotions were neither good nor bad. They were simply messengers, guiding him toward deeper self-awareness. Instead of fighting them, he learned to listen. One day, Thomas decided to test Elliot's progress. He took him to a busy marketplace, a place filled with noise, chaos, and unpredictable energy. They sat at a small tea shop, observing the people around them. A merchant was arguing loudly with a customer, a child was crying, and a group of young men were laughing boisterously. Thomas turned to Elliot and asked, "What do you feel?" Elliot closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "I feel a rush of sensations, noise, movement, emotions swirling around me. But I also feel stillness within myself, like the calm beneath the waves." Thomas smiled. "That is true mastery, Elliot. To find peace not in the absence of chaos, but in the midst of it." The young man who once allowed his emotions to dictate his actions was now becoming a master of his own mind, but his journey was far from over. Little did he know, life would soon test his newfound wisdom in ways he never expect. Part 2. Profound lessons on emotions. As Elliot continued his journey, he realized that understanding emotions was not merely about observing them, it was about learning from them. He sought to deepen his awareness, and Thomas was there to guide him every step of the way. One day, Thomas presented Elliot with a simple task. He handed him a glass jar filled with river water. "Shake it," he instructed. Elliot did so, and the water became murky. "Now set it down and wait." As Elliot watched, the sediment slowly settled to the bottom, leaving the water clear. Thomas smiled. "This is what happens when you allow your emotions to settle, instead of reacting to them immediately." Elliot nodded, understanding that patience was key to emotional clarity. Lesson 1. Emotions are messengers, not masters. One afternoon, a distraught woman named Martha arrived at the monastery. She was overwhelmed with anxiety, fearing the uncertainty of her future. Elliot listened patiently as she poured out her worries. "Martha," he said gently, "what if you viewed your anxiety not as an enemy, but as a guide?" She looked at him, puzzled. "Anxiety arises when we resist uncertainty. Instead of trying to suppress it, acknowledge it. Ask it what it is trying to teach you." Over time, Martha practiced mindfulness, sitting with her discomfort rather than fighting it. Slowly, she found that her anxiety lessened, replaced by a sense of trust in the present moment. Lesson 2. The power of the pause. Another visitor, a man named Robert, was struggling with anger. "I snap at my family over small things," he confessed. "I don't know how to stop." Elliot handed him a small candle and asked him to light it. "Now blow it out." Robert did so easily. "That is your anger when it is small," Elliot explained. "But when you let it build up, it's like a wildfire. It spreads and consumes everything in its path. The key is to recognize it early and pause, before it grows." Robert practiced pausing whenever he felt anger rising. Instead of reacting immediately, he took a deep breath and observed his emotion before responding. Over time, he found that he was able to control his temper and communicate more peacefully. Lesson 3. Transforming pain into compassion. One evening, Elliot found himself reflecting on his own past wounds. He had once been a man ruled by his emotions, reacting rather than responding. But now, he understood that pain, when embraced, could lead to growth. He remembered an old saying Thomas had shared: "A broken heart is an open heart." Pain has the power to soften us, to make us more compassionate toward others who suffer. One day, Elliot encountered a young monk who had just lost a loved one. The monk was overcome with sorrow. Instead of offering empty reassurances, Elliot simply sat with him, holding space for his grief. "Do not rush to push the pain away," he advised. "Let it teach you the depth of love." As the monk allowed himself to grieve, he realized that pain was not something to fear. It was a bridge to greater understanding. The growing wisdom of Elliot. Through these lessons, Elliot continued to evolve. He had learned that emotions were not obstacles to be overcome, but opportunities to deepen his wisdom and compassion. He no longer sought to control them through force, but rather to understand them with patience and mindfulness. One day, Thomas told him, "You are ready, Elliot. You have learned not just to observe your emotions, but to embrace them as part of the great river of life." With a heart full of gratitude, Elliot continued his mission, guiding others along the same path he had once walked. His monastery became a sanctuary for those seeking inner peace, and his wisdom spread far and wide. Elliot had transformed, not by escaping his emotions, but by befriending them, and in doing so, he had discovered the true art of emotional mastery. Part 3. Transforming emotions into strength. Elliot's journey continued. He realized that emotions were not just to be understood and observed. They could be transformed into forces for good. He had learned from Thomas that emotions carried energy, and if harnessed wisely, they could become sources of great strength and wisdom. Lesson 1. Anger as a catalyst for change. One day, a young man named Samuel arrived at the monastery. He was consumed by anger after being betrayed by a close friend. I feel like I'm burning from the inside, he admitted. I want revenge, but I also want peace. How can I have both? Elliot listened, and then took Samuel to the monastery's forge, where a blacksmith was shaping iron. Watch, Elliot said. The blacksmith placed a piece of metal into the fire until it glowed red, then hammered it into shape. Iron must endure the flames to become something strong and useful. Your anger is like this fire. If you wield it wisely, it can shape you instead of destroy you. Samuel learned to channel his anger into productive action. Instead of seeking revenge, he used his frustration to fuel his determination to improve his own life and relationships. With time, his anger transformed into a driving force for growth rather than destruction. Lesson 2. Fear as a guide to courage. A woman named Lillian arrived at the monastery, paralyzed by fear of failure. I am afraid to take risks, to make mistakes, she confessed, so I do nothing at all. Elliot led her to the edge of a small pond and pointed to a frog. Watch him, he said. The frog hesitated on the rock, then leaped into the water, trusting it would hold him. Fear is not meant to stop you. It is meant to prepare you. Like the frog, you must trust in your ability to adapt. Lillian began to embrace small challenges, using her fear as a signal to step forward rather than retreat. Over time, she realized that fear was not an enemy but a companion that guided her toward growth. By leaning into fear, she built confidence and resilience. Lesson 3. Sadness as a path to compassion. One evening, Elliot sat with an elderly man named Henry, who had lost his wife of 50 years. The sorrow is unbearable, Henry whispered. I feel lost without her. Elliot handed him a small candle and lit it. This flame is your love for her, he said. Even in the darkness, it continues to shine. Henry realized that his grief was a reflection of the deep love he had shared. Instead of letting sadness consume him, he began using it as a bridge to connect with others who were grieving. He shared his story, offered support, and found purpose in helping others navigate their own losses. The final test, Elliot's own. Transformation. For years, Elliot had guided others in transforming their emotions, but he, too, would face one last great test. One winter, Thomas, his beloved teacher, passed away peacefully in his sleep. The loss hit Elliot hard. For days, he struggled with grief and uncertainty. Could he continue without his mentor? Then he remembered Thomas's lessons. He sat in meditation, allowing the waves of sorrow to rise and fall without resistance. He saw that his grief was not just a burden. It was a reminder of the love and wisdom Thomas had given him. Instead of being paralyzed by loss, Elliot chose to carry his teacher's legacy forward, sharing what he had learned with even greater compassion. The legacy of emotional mastery. Elliot's journey had come full circle. He had learned that emotions were not obstacles, but pathways to wisdom. By transforming anger into determination, fear into courage, and sadness into compassion, he had unlocked the true power of emotions. His monastery remained a sanctuary for those seeking peace, and his teachings continued to inspire generations. He knew now that mastering emotions was not about eliminating them. It was about understanding their purpose and using them as stepping stones to a richer, more meaningful life. As Elliot looked out over the hills, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had not conquered his emotions, he had befriended them. And in doing so, he had discovered the deepest peace of all. The journey continues. As Elliot sat in quiet reflection at the monastery, he realized that the path of emotional mastery was not an endpoint, but an ongoing journey. He had come a long way, from a young man consumed by emotions to a wise teacher who had learned to transform them into strength. But he knew there would always be more to learn, more to experience, and more to teach. One day, a traveler arrived at the monastery seeking Eliot's guidance. The man was weary, his eyes heavy with sorrow and regret. He had spent years running from his emotions, believing that if he avoided them, they would disappear. "Master Eliot," the traveler asked, "how can I rid myself of these burdens that weigh on my heart?" Eliot smiled gently. "You do not need to rid yourself of them," he replied. "Instead, sit with them. Listen to what they are trying to teach you." He led the traveler to a quiet place under the great oak tree where he himself had once sat, full of doubts and fears. "Close your eyes and observe your emotions," Eliot instructed. "Do not resist them. Do not fight them. Simply allow them to be." The traveler sat in silence, following Eliot's guidance. At first, the emotions felt overwhelming: anger, sadness, regret. But as he continued to breathe and observe, something remarkable happened. The weight on his heart began to lighten. He saw that his emotions were not his enemies, but messengers, guiding him toward deeper understanding. When he opened his eyes, tears streamed down his face, but they were no longer tears of suffering. They were tears of release, of acceptance. "Thank you, Master," he whispered. "For the first time in years, I feel free." Eliot nodded knowingly. Freedom does not come from escaping your emotions, but from understanding them. Embrace them, and they will lead you to peace. A message to you, Eliot's story is not just his own. It is a story for all of us. We all experience emotions that feel overwhelming. We all face moments when anger, fear, or sadness seem to control us. But as Eliot learned, and as you can too, emotions are not meant to be enemies. They are part of the human experience, and when we learn to understand them, they become powerful tools for growth. So, as you continue on your own journey, remember these lessons. Observe your emotions without judgment. Like clouds, passing in the sky, they will come and go. Pause before reacting. Give yourself space to choose how you respond, rather than acting on impulse. Transform emotions into strength. Use anger as fuel for positive change, fear as a guide to courage, and sadness as a bridge to compassion. If you have ever struggled with controlling your emotions, share your experience in the comments below. How have you learned to navigate your feelings? What techniques have helped you find peace? Your story might help someone else on their journey. Support the community. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new lesson in mindfulness and emotional mastery. Remember, the path to emotional peace is one of patience and practice. Keep walking, keep learning, and trust that every step brings you closer to the serenity you seek. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, may you find wisdom in your emotions and peace in your heart.